Alrighty, welcome back to the overnight edition of From Day One. Hopefully all the technical craziness has been worked out. Richard Hoagland, Art Bell, and the moon is in focus for tonight. And let's continue as we rock through Dominion.
Like the cardinals who wouldn't look through Galileo's telescope, and they said he was nuts and violating God. Well, if you don't look at the evidence, you can't accuse someone of being whatever. So go to
sure you can. This is the internet. Anybody about anything.
Not in 1610.
All right, well, anyway.
Go to 3.
I'm there.
Okay. Zoom in.
Remarkable similarity of ruins at Apollo 12 and 14 landing sites.
Now, you see the black and white shot?
Yes, I do.
Overexposed?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. That's the lunar module Intrepid that Conrad and Bean landed on the moon in November of 69, 2 years after the surveyor shot.
Pretty damn cool shot, actually.
Yeah. You notice those horizontal thingies in the sky?
I do. Looks like you know what it looks like? Looks like a wood fence.
Yeah, or a staircase.
I'd go for wood fence.
All right. But now, if you want to flip back to number 2.
No, I don't.
Well,
I will.
Yeah, if I'd had a little more time, I would have prepped these side-by-side comparisons, but it's
all right, I'm back to 2.
Look on the left at the same kind of geometry.
I don't see a wood fence.
Well, it's dimmer because we didn't brighten it overly exposed.
Okay. Sorry.
It's the vertical, horizontal layering.
I really don't see that, Richard. I'm sorry.
Oh, you don't see the comparison? That's interesting.
No, I don't. Look, in shot 3, I clearly see a wood fence in some disrepair, but a wood fence.
Okay. Now, the source material for number 3, the black and white shot, is a frame from a movie that NASA put out called Pinpoint for Science. Back in those days, remember, this is the day when it was Cronkite and we were all over NASA right on the floor.
Yes.
And they were so eager to get their results out to keep people interested in the moon project.
That they released them very quickly.
No, they would bang these things out within days.
Right.
So they made what's called a SP film.
So it is your position, Richard, that because they released them so quickly, they didn't have time to change them and eliminate any possible reference to something artificial that was there.
Because it wasn't in their conception. All the honest guys in NASA had no results out to keep people interested in the moon project.
That they released them very quickly.
No, they would bang these things out within days.
Right.
So they made what's called a SP film.
So it is your position, Richard, that because they released them so quickly, they didn't have time to change them and eliminate any possible reference to something artificial that was there.
Because it wasn't in their conception. All the honest guys in NASA had no idea this stuff was there. So remember in history, it's always the earliest stuff that you can trust. And the later stuff, the folks that want to change things or make history go away or erase, they have time to do their dirty work. Mm-hmm. What NASA did is they produced these films with two companies, one in Virginia and one in Houston, and they got them out within days of the landing when the astronauts had come back, and then they sent them all over the world. So there are hard copy film prints in little canisters with this name on it, Pinpoint for Science, the history of the Apollo 12 mission, half an hour, all over the planet, in India, in Russia, in Japan, in Brazil, in Argentina, in Dubuque, Iowa. There's a zillion copies of this film out there that has absolute parallel data showing glass structures similar, if not identical, to the geometry seen on the surveyor shots taken 2 years after surveyor.
Stop for a second. Are you telling me that this thing that I'm calling a wood fence?
Wood fence.
And it does look like one. In fact, I have no idea what the vertical gyrations, what they mean.
That's film scratches.
Don't scratches.
Remember, all we've done is to scan this and put it up. We haven't touched it in any other way.
But you're telling me, basically, that this illustrates, again, the dome.
Yes. And it actually could be a portion of the same one, because the Apollo 12 landing was not too far away as the crow flies. Of course, crows can't fly on the moon, no air.
Richard, I do admit, the way the light is would suggest that something clear, opaque is there. I don't know what it is, but it does seem to illustrate something is there.
Well, you can eliminate by the process of known physics all the things it can't be. It can't be an atmosphere, because we've got instruments that have measured the gazillion molecules on the moon's surface, and there is no air. We're going to get
but they are about to measure something they're calling an atmosphere, which I thought was weird.
But see, it's about definitions. The lunar atmosphere exists, but it is millions and millions and millions of times thinner than the air we're breathing. And optically, you couldn't even see it. There's so few atoms and molecules per cubic foot or per cubic
hardly worth talking about or even measuring.
Well, on a long-term basis, it can have effects on the lunar surface. So from a scientific point of view, that's why they're interested in measuring its properties. But from a practical point of view, it is absolutely as if it was not there. It certainly cannot create on film. Remember how slow film used to be compared to electronic cameras?
Yes.
And this is now taken not after sunset. This is taken in broad daylight. And what we've done is we've suppressed the light on the lunar surface, which is already overexposed, and we brightened up the vacuum black lunar sky above the horizon to bring up the faint scattering of light from the ragged fragments of this shattered dome. Actually, a small, tiny piece of it. You're not seeing. You're so close. You're seeing just a tiny portion. Like if you were, think of a huge structure like the Superdome, and you're standing 2 feet away from the wall. That's what you're seeing. You're seeing a tiny portion of a much more vast structure, which under 1/6 lunar gravity would rise miles into the sky.
Somebody's objecting.
That is Morella. Morella loves to have national airtime. She has bothered George. She's actually barked during the commercials when I've gone to break at the top and the bottom of the hour. I'm talking to you. I'm not talking to her. She's pissed. Plus, you're a cat guy, and I know.
Now, listen. You're going to lead me down a bad road here. I said no bad language, and that is a rule on this program.
Okay.
Angry. She's angry.
All right. Oh, you really can't use that other word? Okay.
I'd rather not.
All right, fine. My point is that these are two independent data sets taken 2 years apart by two different sets of instrumentation.
Right. I'm there.
And see, these are not our only examples. I mean, you and I could spend days going through photograph after photograph showing the same stuff all over the moon. We don't have time. That's why I have a website.
I need special medicine for it.
Now let's get to image number 4. So this is where the MacGuffin is. This is where Hitchcock's end of the story comes to a point.
All right, we're on artbell.com, folks. So when you hear him say image 4, that means you should be following along with us, or it's going to be hard for you to even comment. Artbell.com. All right, now that's a nice picture.
Well, it's an artistic rendering. And what it shows is this 800-pound unmanned Laddie robotic spacecraft, which is headed toward the moon tonight. It's going to take them about 30 days in these wandering orbits that are very low energy to get there, even though you can go there in 3 days. They've chosen, because of the rocket system they used, a very elaborate way of saving energy so they can put as much payload in their spacecraft as possible. And this is the spacecraft that could, if we keep NASA honest, tell us if we're looking at ancient glass domes or we're looking at just some natural phenomenon that has never been encountered before in space and is just from everybody.
All right, that's very hopeful, Richard. Trust me, I would like nothing more in the world than for you to be right and for them to take the images, and here comes a clear image of a dome. But I just know that you're going to say, if there's any dome in the picture, they're going to eliminate it before we ever see it.
Well, maybe and maybe not. Remember, when you and I did shows 10 years ago, the politics were a certain way. When you were talking with Stephen Greer earlier in the week, we had the phase of this bullet has your name on it to keep secrets.
Right.
My political assessment now is that there's so many people in NASA who are desperate to leak the real stuff out. And when we get into our Mars Curiosity part of the evening, you're going to see some far more amazing things that are obvious in every photograph that they're releasing.
Wouldn't you think by now, Richard, if NASA had been doctoring photographs, that a lot of people would have come forward and wanting nothing to do with hiding a gigantic truth of that magnitude from the world?
Which people are we talking about?
The people I just talked about, who would be so upset about hiding a truth of this magnitude from the world that they'd get the real thing out and say, here you go.
You mean people in NASA?
Sure.
Well, but they're just human beings. They've got car payments. They've got kids. They've got mortgages. They have to live. They have to survive. If they're told, a la what Greer was told, you either do this or you don't do anything, what are they going to, what's their decision? And it doesn't even have to be life-threatening. All it has to be is job-threatening.
All there has to be is a few Snowdens in NASA.
But they have to be able to get the evidence out. You understand? If the evidence that
I do,
Snowden,
yes.
If Snowden hadn't carefully stashed away on all those thumb drives these documents, these papers, would anybody be paying attention to a guy named Snowden? If he just came out and said there's this stuff going on?
No, and I'm saying if there was a Snowden within NASA, he'd pack away on microfilm or whatever he had to pack it away in, the real photographs, and get them to us.
Well, there's evidence that way back when, 30-some years ago, when NASA was preparing some of these films, if you know how film is prepared, where you basically splice different segments together, and you had to physically splice it, you had to make what's called internegatives and all that.
Yes.
Somebody actually did stash interesting information between the splices on some of these films. And the reason I know that is back when I started doing this work which was 20-some years? I had a guy, an expert Hollywood guy, who was a technician who worked in the major film industry north of Los Angeles, and he was an inventor. He was a brilliant engineering genius, and he had created kind of the next generation of the moviola. You're familiar with moviolas, right?
Yes.
Which was this gadget they used to spool film.
That's
through.
right.
Well, this was a step up above because it had what was called a floating point stage, or film gate, which means you could look at film and not put scratches on it. So you could run it back and forth, and you could edit it and chop it into pieces and splice it together, but you wouldn't put scratches, which is the bane of all film editors.
That was then. This is now. Now we've got high-resolution digital photography.
Yeah, we've also got electronic guys at the NSA who are snooping on everybody doing everything. And if you don't think everybody who has access to data like this has server numbers to where anybody logging on for access is logged.
No, now we've got high-resolution digital photography.
Yeah, we've also got electronic guys at the NSA who are snooping on everybody doing everything. And if you don't think everybody who has access to data like this has server numbers to where anybody logging on for access is logged, anybody sticking a thumb drive in, I mean, we're not just talking now about millions of pages of text. We're talking about a relatively small number of images that are in electronic, trackable form, so anybody trying to do a Snowden on us would get caught.
Certainly everything's being monitored. I know that's true now. So you're saying, look, it makes it all that much easier for them to be in absolute total control of what we see.
Well, look, I it before, both with you and many other people. We have a space situation where you have one agency which controls the spacecraft, controls the rockets, controls the launch pads, controls the downlink facilities, the big radio antennas, controls the instruments, controls the scientists, controls the public relations. They own the system end to end to end. There's no independent way you and I can go to the moon tonight, take a picture, and come back and say, gee, look at that. Right?
Yes, and they're
now there are private folks.
They're certainly connected to government, Richard, so...
In every possible way. There are no independent moon missions. Yes.
Okay. All right.
And if there are, if the politics are still where we're not supposed to know any of the stuff is out there, I would bet you dollars to Navy beans that when the first private lunar mission leaves, unless it is sanctioned by the powers that be, it will have a mysterious, sad accident. And it will be attributed to, oh, they're just a bunch of amateurs. They don't know what they're doing. Engineering is hard. Space is hard. And no one will ever question.
Okay, if this gorgeous spacecraft that I'm looking at goes and takes pictures of the dome area, and they're good and they're clear and they're high res, and you get them back and there's no hint of a dome or even dome pieces there, and it hasn't been messed with, will you be satisfied that there's not a dome there?
Well, first of all, there's a slight error in your statement. That's not what they're planning to do.
They're not going to look at the dome area.
They do not have cameras.
They don't have cameras.
They have not. We think there are cameras on board that they're sneaking to the moon, but they're not telling anybody.
Oh my!
And I've documented this, and then let me go through the story, and then you can pick it apart if you want. This spacecraft, when you go to the official websites, either the European Space Agency or the NASA Space Agency websites, and you type in Google LADEE, LADEE mission, you'll get a whole bunch of links. When you look through the instruments, there's only 3 instruments on this 800-pound. You'll get a whole bunch of links. When you look through the instruments, there's only 3 instruments on this 800-pound spacecraft.
And they are what?
And they're all non-visual, non-photographic. There's what's called a UVS telescope, ultraviolet visual telescope, designed to look at spectra and at photometry, which is how brightness levels change on a squiggly graph.
All right, would that see the dome?
Of course. Because it's when you're looking at these pictures, you're looking at light scattering. But if you don't have a picture for Art Bell to look at, and you publish a set of squiggly lines, are you going to know it's a damn dome?
Well, no, but if NASA comes back and says it's a dome...
They won't. That's the huge sociological things in this culture, which we have time to get into later in the evening. They have been publishing official images from Mars from Curiosity, and we'll get to that in a couple of minutes, of artifacts all over the Martian surface of Gale Crater. And because they don't hold a press conference and say, that's an artificial piece of junk left by some prior civilization, nobody looking at the picture wants to say what it is except us. And who's going to believe us? Because we're not official. We have a culture where unless the president comes out and tells everybody what reality is, nobody independently wants to make a judgment.
All right, Richard, hold it there. We're going to take a short break. Domes. So, I'm contemplating domes on the moon. And you should be too. I mean, if there is a chance that there's a dome on the moon, that means one of 3 incredible things. Wouldn't that be something? Somebody else built it. Or even if it was us a long time ago. Don't think it was the Russians. But a prior civilization? Yeah, maybe. We'll try back. Somebody on the wormhole said, Richard's getting angry. No, he's not. Richard's not getting angry. We're just having a heated discussion. We do that all the time. We've been doing that for years. I don't always see the same things that Richard does. But what I would like to discuss, Richard, is, the implications of what you're saying. If it's true, then it's the story of our lifetimes, of all lifetimes to date. It's that big, and
for it to be proven either true or not true. The only way you do that is with evidence, scientific evidence.
All right, I want to go back in time a little bit, Richard. You maintained early, and you and I argued to death about it, about the phase on Mars, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the phase on Mars. What is your position now on the phase on Mars?
Well, do you want to leave the moon yet? Because I wanted to get to...
just for a moment. We'll come back to the moon.
Well, the phase on Mars is real. There's an ancient city around it. There's been umpteen spacecraft that has taken, images of it. Do you know that for a place that NASA claims it has no scientific interest in, the Cydonia region of Mars where the face is the most photographed region on Mars of any place on Mars in the last 30 years?
And that's probably thanks to you.
Well, no. It's thanks to NASA people inside really wanting to know and lying through their teeth to everybody else. But the data says they're really interested despite what they say. If it's just a pile of rocks, why do you spend billions of dollars over 30 years from the 70s taking pictures of a place that means nothing?
Well, Richard, what if the people at NASA were genuinely going, okay, maybe it's a face. Let's find out.
That's exactly my assessment.
Okay.
Our company is when they tell the public nothing there, move along, and privately they're interested up to their eyeballs in what I've been proposing for the last couple decades.
Now, how do you know that?
Because if the data says they're taking information from spacecraft again and again and again in one region, and yet they're telling the Congress and they're telling the public there's nothing there, move along, that is the height of scientific hypocrisy, to say nothing of the attacks they've made against me and a lot of other people who looked at this now.
Well, look, I admit Cydonia is an interesting region. There's no question about that. Is it a face? When they did the closer high-res photography, frankly, Richard, it didn't look like a face at that point. Now, from Earth, with the right telescope, it looks like a face. If the sun is in the right place, it definitely looks like a face. But, the latter pictures that we've received, no.
Well, when you say latter pictures, you kind of have to pick which pictures. Because if you look at the NASA
Fair enough.
Yeah, the NASA pictures, when you get the so-called best images, it really doesn't look like it did in the Viking shots. But when you look at the images coming from the Mars Express mission, from the European Space Agency,
right,
you see all kinds of exquisite detail that for some reason you don't see on the NASA images. And that's kind of impossible because they're supposed to be photographing the same thing in the same Martian desert, right?
Okay. All right, so your position then, I just wanted to clear it up, remains that was a face put there by, your choice of the above, right? So we would recognize it was a face, realize there was life on Mars at some point.
Well, that's one hypothesis. When you try to crawl into people's headspace, into their minds, particularly separated by the present by millions of years, and you may not even be dealing with the same species, because remember, we don't have any ground truth. We don't have access to the libraries. We don't have a signature. We don't know who did it. All we know is something interesting was done, and what we need is a human mission to go there, find the libraries, and find out who did it, and where they came from, and if they were related to us. Now, we've got some models, some scenarios, some educated guesses, some speculations based on the science. But
and you admit that that's all it is?
Yeah, at the moment, because we don't have the ground truth.
Right.
It'd be really cool to have a human mission to Mars in our lifetime where astronauts, multinational of course, walk in the front door, take set up TV cameras, send a live transmission, and say, good God, look at that. Is that going to happen? I don't know.
I don't know. You are getting some support from some of the people that are, sending messages.
Can I interrupt?
Yes.
It's irrelevant. Science is not a popularity contest. That's why I'm so upset when people say, "Oh, so and so is with you," or "So and so is against."
Yeah, I know. I'm not turning it into that. I'm just saying, Richard, there are people that have looked at these images, back from the phase on Mars to the present, and they are seeing what you see, and Cydonia is a absolutely fascinating place, and I can imagine that NASA thought, yeah, well, maybe, and so they went back and took more photographs.
Well, you can go to the archive. I mean, this is just engineering data, and you can look at the missions and the amount of time they've spent taking pictures, high-resolution pictures at trigonometry, different sun angles, even in color, of this one little region. And remember, Mars is a geologically interesting place. It has as much land area as all of Earth's continents combined, even though Mars is half the size of Earth because there are no current oceans.
I'm giving you this, Richard. I'm saying
They spend so much time taking data on one place and publicly saying there's no interest. They're lying. Look, we live in the 21st century.
I'm agreeing with you. Let me actually say yes to you. I agree. I think they have been fascinated with Cydonia, and so they went back again and again and again. And I think they did it in part because of you, Richard. Really, I do. And the fact, and the fact that it looks like a face.
It has nothing to do with me. The in crowd and the out crowd are totally separate. We, and I'm talking now about everybody listening to my voice, including you, Art, we don't count from these people's perspectives. There are two separate civilizations almost going on. There's the in crowd, which we can call euphemistically the 1%, or the 100th of 1%, and then there's all the rest of us. And history in the last 20 years has proven that we don't count. Look around at all the mainstream news and all the things that we used to talk about that were spooky or conspiratorial or, oh, there's no way that could be true. Every worst nightmare that you and I and all your other guests have ever discussed has come true, has it not? The worst case scenario is worse than anybody could have imagined, up to and including Edward Snowden.
A lot of them, yes, have been true.
Not a lot, all of them. There is a very important report called Report from Iron Mountain. You want to have someone on some night to discuss Report from Iron Mountain.
Here, I want to say something, Richard. Okay, let me say something, Richard. Okay. I'm going to support you. I think that if the current spying being done on the American people was done in 1950, let's say 1950, Richard, and the American people became aware that all of their phone calls were being listened to or monitored, and all of their emails, if they had email or mail or whatever.
Their actual hard copy mail was open to some secret office.
All right, I said mail. That they were being spied on by the government en masse, as they are now. I think there would have been a revolution.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
In a nation with a lot of people carrying guns, there would have been a real revolution.
Mm-hmm.
Now people just seem to roll over and accept it as, oh, that's just the cost of doing business. So I'm on Facebook and I'm on Google and everybody's monitoring what I'm doing. Well, they're doing it for business purposes. They want to sell me something. We have become so passive at the idea that we are being treated like chattel, like slaves. And there's a few people who have access to the good stuff. And by good stuff, I mean, you asked me before the question, what does this mean if I'm right, if there's an ancient civilization on the moon and Mars?
Yes.
It changes everything because it gives us the tools so that 7 billion human beings technologically can live off the Earth without destroying the Earth. They can all have incomes, they can all have jobs, they can all have a life, they can all have families. They don't have to go to war with each other and shoot each other because of something stupid like oil. It totally changes the equation of the haves versus the have-nots, and that's why this information has been locked up, Art. They want us in chains.
Well, we're getting there.
We're so close. And that's why I'm looking at this mission back to the moon, and I'm saying there may be a contingent, a group, that are going to blow the whistle, and they've set this up very carefully so that the bad guys don't know what the good guys inside are about to spring on them.
All right. I'm going to give you this much, Richard. If they didn't want us to know, about what was on Mars, and they didn't want us to know what was on the moon, and there was something of intense interest there, they have the power for us not to know.
Totally.
Yeah, okay. That I'll give you.
Unless there's a break inside, unless the politics of cover-up, a la Brookings, which is a nice excuse, have changed, we won't know from this current mission. And unfortunately, there's indications they're planning to really try to sneak another one past us. Let me tell you how. When one of my readers on Enterprise saw that I was going to be on your show, he sent me an email the other night and he said, "What are those two weird things on the top of the Laddie spacecraft?" And I went and looked, and I didn't see anything unusual, and so we got into this dialogue, and I actually started doing some homework and digging, and finally I found an obscure engineering thing out of NASA that said they were what are called star trackers. Now, star trackers are important because you need to maintain the attitude of a spacecraft in space, so you can give the inertial measuring units, the gyroscopes inside that are spinning, basic updates so that you know where the thing is pointing. If you don't know where it's pointing, you can't point the instruments, you can't get data, et cetera, et cetera. So star trackers have been on every single unmanned spacecraft we ever launched. As the technology has gotten more sophisticated, they basically evolved from little slit scan thingies where you basically are looking through two razor blades butted up against each other, and the star has to fall right between them, so there's a little sliver of light, and that's how you know your point is at the star.
Yes.
They've evolved into CCD cameras. When the Clementine mission went back in the early 90s, 92, it was a DOD mission. They had these star tracker cameras that frankly were a damn sight better than the best NASA cameras, like on Surveyor, because they were built on state-of-the-art CCD technology and not using old Vidicon tubes, TV tubes. Those pictures of the moon showed an extended glow around the moon, like you were looking at the combined scattered light of a lot of lunar domes shattered, made of glass, and scattering light that shouldn't be there. And then when the astronauts, and I'm going to back up a bit.
I want to ask you a question about the astronauts right now, and that is, if what you're saying is true, and there are many domes and or buildings, very tall buildings, you talked about those before, glass buildings, right?
Yep.
Okay. If that sort of thing was there, then we have to presume that our astronauts got a look at some of it, right?
Yep.
So then we have to jump to the conclusion that the astronauts, and here I may help your case as opposed to hurt it, that the astronauts...
I know where you're going.
Well, yes. They saw it. They've been sworn to secrecy with, I don't know, maybe a little name on it, whatever.
Or even worse.
Or even worse?
Yep. Their minds have been altered. They have been subjected to a sophisticated technology that has replaced their real memories of what they saw and what they did with fake memories. And the key, the entry point of that theory is the conversation you and I had with Ed Mitchell over a decade ago, where Ed on air live and in his book, The Way of the Explorer, confounds his own perception of his experience by saying, I can't remember what it felt like to do what I did on the moon.
Thank you. You saved me from having to say it. Now, here's a follow-up question to that. You're right about Ed Mitchell because I was there. I asked him. Now, what about the other astronauts, Richard? And I think, again, this comes down on your side because they've all been sort of disturbed.
In Chapter 2 of Dark Mission, which Mike and I spent a lot of time researching heavily, I was so intrigued with the Mitchell anomaly, because, look, it's got to be the high point of your entire existence to be one of the first friggin' people to walk on another planet, right?
Totally,
It's got to
absolutely,
be
yes.
the zenith of your life. When I met him, because I palled around with him early on when we were still going to the moon with a later lunar mission. Remember, I was a Cronkite's guy, so I had access to all the astronauts and all the other people. God, if I knew then what I know now. The questions I could have asked. Anyway, Mitchell at that time was freely acknowledging that he had real problems because he couldn't remember what it felt like, the emotion. And because he's a smart guy, it bothered him. It bothered him so much that he actually booked therapy sessions with a well-known hypnotherapist. I won't mention any names, but I have, because I know the people involved, because I was really focused on this in the later years. When he went to those sessions, the thing he wanted to do is to somehow find out why he couldn't remember the emotions of what he did. He remember the mission timeline, what rocks they picked up, the tools they used, the
very, very curious, Richard.
all that.
It's very curious.
Let me leap to the end of the chase here.
Go
So he
ahead.
gets to the therapist, who's a well-known household name. If I told you the name, you'd go, oh, that person. And they're in their first session, and this person is trying hypnotic regression to eliminate all the fuzzy stuff and get him to calm and to focus. And he gets to the point, and he says, that's not important. I don't need to know that. And he absolutely resists the hypnotic regression. They can't break through the block. He had some psychological inhibition against remembering his real experience, and it has bedeviled the bejesus out of him for 40 years, as it has with all the other astronauts. When I was researching for Dark Mission, I found to my amazement and sadness, because when you think of national heroes being tampered with to this degree, it goes back to what I said a few minutes ago, how the 1.01% doesn't give a damn about the rest of us, including national heroes who are their slaves to do their bidding and put out their political spin, but not to be valued as individual human beings under the Constitution. Each one of them has a way of working around this problem that none of them can remember what it felt like.
I can offer no argument to this, and if people don't find this strange and really strange, then they're not listening. That's all I can say. I
People say to me,
weird.
Art, they say to me, well, why haven't we been back to the moon for 40 years? Well, duh.
I see that.
If the powers that be know what's there, and they don't want the rest of the planet to know, then they would never go back. They got
all
what
right,
they needed.
stop for a moment. Why wouldn't they want us to know? Now we're going to talk about Brookings for a minute, okay?
Right.
Because there really has to be a reason. Now, Brookings, of course, suggested that if the world was given information that there are others, that it would deeply impact so many of our institutions, and chiefly among them would be religion. It would deeply impact religion. Now, there's arguments against that, and I know there's a million people come out and say, oh, wouldn't bother me, and that's fine. Maybe it wouldn't bother you, but it would bother a lot of people, and that's what you have to understand. Now, there represents a reason for not telling us. Maybe it's not a good reason anymore, but it's a reason.
Well,
and when you start talking about hiding all of this, Richard, you damn well better have a reason why the American government and other governments would hide these things.
Well, look, when you come across a dead body on the floor, let's say you're a cop, you don't give a damn about why the person was killed.
Oh, yes, you do. It's
no, you don't.
Motive.
No. You can't. It's nice to have a motive, but there have been plenty of jury convictions without a motive.
Not as many. Usually you
but
need
there
a motive.
Been many, and there's not as few as you think. No. You can't. It's nice to have a motive, but there have been plenty of jury convictions without a motive.
Not as many. Usually you
but
need
there
a
have
motive.
Been many, and there's not as few as you think.
Okay.
By the way, I just got a note from George. fact, I've got 2 notes from George. His first one, he said, I hear he's giving you a hard time. And I said, we're having a spirited conversation.
No, George, it's called a conversation.
So he just sent me another one.
Yeah.
Go get him.
Okay, come get me, Richard. No problem.
Look, I've known you.
That's what we're doing. If we weren't doing this, I wouldn't be having fun.
I have known you since before George was out of the crib. Not quite, but, you know.
Not that far.
No one seems to understand that the way you get to the bottom of this is you have 2 very civilized people talk about real stuff without impersonal, and I love it when you challenge because it means you're listening to the answers.
Richard, it's called a talk show.
For a reason.
All right, enough of that. So, anyway, back to Brookings.
Well, I think
Brookings does give us, I think it gives us a legitimate reason to hide this. And short of Brookings and what they say in there, what reason would there be to hide it?
Well, look, if we're doing multiple choice, remember your conversation with Greer? You know, why don't they want us to know about UFOs and all that? And you went down a list of all the reasons. Ultimately, it seems to me it comes down to control. This planet has a history of control. Even under the aegis of democracy, ultimately, we don't have a pure democracy. And if you look at Washington now, with the stunning exception of the latest refusal by the American people to stampede into another stupid Middle East war, and the Congress to actually listen, as well as the president, we haven't had many examples of where the people's will was actually exercised for decades, right?
I agree with that, yes.
So if...
And since I agree with that, hold on, Richard, we're going to do a quick break here. We do have them. Richard C. Hoagland is my guest, and yes, we're having a discussion. It's called a talk show.
Ain't got no trouble in my life.
Not at all.
No foolish dream to make me cry. I'm never frightened or worried. I know I always get by.
Very large signal is right. Let's see. This comes from Jerry. Jerry says, the bit Richard was just talking about the astronauts having had their minds blocked. You know, I thought for years that this was done when they were quarantined after they returned from the moon. Perfect time to do it. I've got to admit that there's probably something to this. I don't know that they've had their minds blocked, but something is absolutely wrong with their reactions when they're asked about how they felt to walk on the moon, to be a man walking on the moon. This would not be something you would forget. You wouldn't forget your feelings and your emotions, and it would be, I don't know, a high point in your life, and you just sure as hell wouldn't forget. Richard?
I'm here.
Okay, so I'm with you on that part, and I guess what I want to ask you now is, in your mind, is Brookings no longer viable?
Well, I've always thought, you know, when I say always, I mean, you know, you and I haven't, it's like Rip Van Winkle. You know, I was listening to it the other night, and it was like I had woken up from a 10-year sleep, and there was art, and there were guests, and there were good conversation, and it's like you're in the groove. You are really in the groove, and I love talking with you. I don't know why people think I'm angry. I'm passionate because I'm tired of being lied to.
Right, I'm passionate too, and that's all it is. It's fun.
Like, the American people were so tired, so sick to death of endless war, they said in the last couple of weeks, no. And the most amazing thing is the system listened. This is unheard of, and I think this is going to progress. Now, if this is part of something new, which is bubbling under the body politic, this mission to the moon could be finally the vindication of all the things that will change the world for the better if this data comes out and people realize, oh my God, not only are we not alone, it was us at one time. We did astonishing, amazing things. There's amazing stuff left there which you've brought back to Earth could be turned on and could give everybody a human life, regardless of the fact that there's 7 billion people destroying the planet tonight. I mean, this is a game changer in every sense of the word, which is why it's important to argue and to debate and to discuss data and to have a vigorous conversation at an international space satellite level, reaching multiple continents. Because this is not just about Americans or hi Canadians. It's about everybody. This changes everything, and this unmanned mission, if the good guys can sneak one past the bad guys, if they've set this up correctly to where that spacecraft in 3 weeks goes into orbit, and they begin to take data and they confirm what I've been showing in these pictures, and it's just the tip of the proverbial iceberg.
Okay, but Richard, my question is, are we ready?
Yes. We'll never be more ready. Like as Greer said the other night, it would have been a lot easier, I think, 50 years ago. Because the 50s, we were all expecting there was somebody out there. Now, the movies had them all being really, really bad guys, right?
That's right.
That's why it's the only safe route to introduce people to the idea of an inhabited universe is to find ruins when there's nobody home. And it's proactive.
I would agree. Yeah,
we go there. It's like archaeology. Are we threatened by the Sumerians? Are we threatened by the Assyrians? Are we threatened by the Mayans? No. Why? Because they've been dead and gone a long, long time. Well, whoever left the stuff on the moon and Mars had been dead and gone a long, long time. But the difference is, unlike these pre-technological ruins that we've investigated, the goodies, the spoils, the incredible, wondrous, magical physics and technologies and breakthroughs available from a high-tech civilization in ruins, all you got to do is find a library. And the library will be in the form that we can probably translate with computers and chips and the full state-of-the-art we now have. And you'll have,
all right, I'll give you this, Richard.
You'll have 3D.
If there is a library, and it's on Mars or it's on the moon, it would have been a logical place. Either place would have been a logical one for them to have left archives for us to find.
Lots of archives.
Go back to 2001, whatever.
Well, look. Let's assume the worst case scenario, and something happens, and everything disappears tomorrow morning on Earth, right?
Kaku's thing would have done that. What is it? WR
104.
Yes.
Think of your channel in Sirius. Yeah, and I'm not sure I agree with the astrophysics of that, but that's a whole other discussion. The point is, let's assume something terrible happens and everybody dies. But all
that'll be a moot point.
Yeah, all the stuff. By the way, under that scenario, humans and biology and dogs and cats and pussycats and begonias would all be dead. But all our industry, our infrastructure, our technology would not be. It would quietly degrade, like those films, Earth Without People, over decades and millennia.
Right.
Now, suppose an alien civilization comes and finds this little blue planet. They land. They don't know, obviously, the names of any of the places they're going to land, but they land on, let's say, Las Vegas. Just pick Las Vegas, all right?
All the movies do. You might as well.
If they dig deep underground, let's say 10, 20, 30, 40 feet, they'll find stuff. And they'll find it in fairly good condition because it will have been protected because of dirt and sand and stuff on top of it, and there's no oxygen underground if you get down deep enough. What if they find a computer?
More likely to find a slot machine.
What if they find more than one computer? What if they land, in the middle of Chicago or Los Angeles? Or, in other words, what's the main way that our civilization has now of preserving and storing and archiving zillions of copies of the same stuff?
Well, I don't know if a hard drive would make it. Maybe one of the new digital babies.
And we're a whisker away from optical crystal storage media.
It's true.
rocks. That's why rocks last billions of years. So we're going to have media which very shortly are going to be immortal by any civilization standard. And there's going to be a zillion copies of everything ever done. Which means it's not we have to find a centralized library, Art. All we have to do is find one of their computers that still works.
That's right.
And on the moon, it's going to be duck soup because nothing has happened on the moon for millions and millions and millions of years. And certainly if you get down deep enough underground, nothing has disturbed it. So yeah, a human expedition that goes and looks for the libraries will eventually find them. And of course, to short circuit this around, my feeling is that Kennedy's real reason for sending our guys to the moon was to find the archives and bring it back and put it to benefit for all mankind, and that's why they killed him. And the data I have that supports that is that 12 days after he agreed to go there with Khrushchev, they bumped him off, and then they put Khrushchev under house arrest, and he died a broken man sitting on a rocker on his porch when the world went nuts into a huge spiral of new weapons development.
Yes, it did.
And I know that he and Kennedy were in touch because Ted Sorensen, who was almost like Kennedy's spiritual soul brother. They were like brothers. They thought the same. They talked the same. They wrote the same. They had the same philosophy. Without Sorensen, Kennedy would not have been the genius orator that he was. And
all right, here's the rub that I see, Richard.
Well, can I finish my point?
I guess, yeah, go ahead.
In Sorensen's book called Counselor, he describes how from the day JFK walked into the Oval Office, he would give Sorensen an envelope with a letter for Khrushchev, separate from state, separate from the DOD, really separate from the CIA.
Yes.
Ted would walk down into the middle of Washington, D.C., down Pennsylvania Avenue. He'd stand in a corner, and a guy from the KGB would come up to him with a folded copy of the Washington Post.
But we don't know what was in this, right?
Yes, we do.
How do we know?
Because Sorensen reports it in his book.
And he says what was in it.
From day one, he was trying to get Khrushchev to go to the moon with the United States.
Okay.
And when Khrushchev finally told his son in the garden of their dacha outside Moscow in late fall of 1963, I've decided I can trust this man. It was after the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Right.
12 days later, Kennedy was killed. Lyndon Johnson and the chief, I forget who the congressman was in the House, introduced legislation forbidding the United States from cooperating with the Soviet Union in going to the moon.
Well, you weave a fascinating possibility. Here's what I want to say, Richard. If this is proven true, if it somehow in any way ends up suggesting to the world that the source of life on Earth is other than as written in the good book, we've got problems.
You mean intelligent life?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have problems anyway. Because science is, look, the way
those are big ones. Those are really, really big ones.
You've got JC calls you all the time. If JC were confronted tomorrow with evidence of a lunar civilization, you think it would matter? You think it would matter a whit to him?
No.
You think he would pay attention?
No, he would banish them to boiling pits of sewage.
Yeah, sewage, right. And he would refuse to acknowledge the existence of the information. My feeling for decades, and I think this is what Brookings was saying, is that those people will wrap themselves in a bubble inside an enigma, inside a freezer, and they will totally be unfazed by this because their life continues regardless of the facts of science that would intrude on their view of the universe. What would really happen is that the smart people on the planet would seize the opportunity to break out of the prison and the shackles we're currently in. They would take these technologies, put them to use to free people from being demeaning slaves and become, rulers of their own destiny. They would stop despoiling the earth, contaminating the planet, ruining the nest.
Maybe.
Well,
Look,
technologies I'm talking about are the same technologies you were talking about with Stephen the other night.
If Genesis was no longer true in the minds of those who looked at the evidence, there'd be big trouble, Richard.
I don't agree.
In other words,
that is a philosophical perspective, and we have a right to disagree. See, this is how Brookings used this as a club to basically threaten everybody in this report.
Well, let's talk about clubs for a second. How big a club would that be? That would mean, to a lot of people, Genesis, wrong, new information, right. No afterlife, no heaven, no hell, no punishment for the evil.
Why do the two go hand in hand?
Well, you're hitting the underpinnings of religion, Richard, really hard when you say life didn't originate. Look, if Genesis goes, a lot goes.
Or Genesis gets reinterpreted, and my feeling is those who are fundamentally religious will continue to believe what they want to believe, data notwithstanding, and the rest of us can move on to create a real civilization on this planet. Can I go back?
Well, maybe we need a new assessment of what would happen. Maybe we need a new Brookings.
Yeah. Oh, that would be fantastic. But remember, a few minutes ago I talked about the report from Iron Mountain.
Yes, sir.
Which was commissioned under Kennedy as an alternative to what he foresaw as a perpetual state of war on planet Earth. And he tasked certain people, and there's huge controversy over, was the study that came out real? Was it satire? You know, the way you dismiss real stuff is you make fun of it, then nobody believes it.
Mm-hmm.
Given all the things that report from Iron Mountain, which Robin has done numerous shows on, with extraordinary reception by our audience, because they're dumbfounded that all of the things forecast in that report, which was published in the early 60s, have come true, including the idea of the need to perpetuate perpetual war on Earth to maintain control in the absence of peace that would create such uncertainties and such depression in the economy that civilization itself would crumble. Sounds awfully lot like the fear porn of Brookings.
All right, and with that, we will leave Art Bell and Mr. Hoagland for tonight. Come on back tomorrow night, where we will pick them up in part 3. Until then, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Help us get to that goal of 50,000 views, 1,000 subscribers. So Boxy, of course, sends us those nice red boxes, and of course, Google puts us on the lovely algorithm. Until then, like, share, and subscribe. Be kind to one another, and release the Krakens as we march along this overnight and every overnight here from day one. Have a great night's sleep. We'll see you tomorrow.